Hey everybody, this is Dr. Shawn from Vitality Chiropractic. Welcome back to our interview series where I'll be talking with other healthcare professionals, going through more about how they got started, the people they help, and of course more about their services. Today we have a special guest coming to us live from the USA. Dr. Shawn Dill qualified from Logan 25 years ago, then immediately moved to Costa Rica, where he spent nearly the next decade running busy practices and helping thousands of patients per week. In this time, he developed the laws for chiropractic in the country before moving to America again in 2004, where he began teaching at Life University. And I know a number of my colleagues that work here in Singapore actually were taught by Dr. Dill at that point as well. Since this time, he's been able to set up a seminar series for upper cervical care, teaching around the world, and has established the Specific Chiropractic centers with nearly 20 locations across the United States. Despite his experience, he still takes this time to give back, including a trip to Philippines last November, where just 4 docs, including myself, Dr. Shawn, Dr. Addison, and Dr. Jane, were offering free care in Manila, on some days seeing over 500 patients. He and his wife, Dr. Lacey Book, are the owners of the Black Diamond Club, where they guide a community of service providers to make the biggest impact possible in their field, and wrote the book None of Your Business as a guide for service providers. So, Shawn, how's it going at the moment in the States?
Well, I think just like in all parts of the world, right? What an interesting time. One of the things that's super cool is, though, at the same time, is that we had Tucker Max on with us in the Black Diamond Club a couple of days ago, and he said something really interesting I want to share as we begin. Is this is probably the first time in history where every person in the world, so it doesn't matter really where you are, and it also doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, we're all having pretty much the same experience, right? It doesn't matter if you're in Asia, Europe, United States, South America. We're all confined to our homes to some extent and trying to navigate sort of a confined life, right? And so, I mean, I think like everybody, here we are, thankful that we have technology that we can share with each other, but just like everyone else, still stuck in my house too.
I completely agree. I was on a web call yesterday and everyone's saying, how do they feel? And people are saying that they feel, a bit scared. They're feeling a bit fearful. They're worrying. And then, in the comments are like, how do people feel? And I was like, opportunity. This is a chance, a leveling field. Mm-hmm. It's a chance where everyone, like you said, they're on the same plane. Mm-hmm. So kind of if we're going back before we start today, for some people who maybe have never seen a chiropractor before, how would you explain chiropractic to them?
Well, first and foremost, I think it would kind of depend where we are, right, in our relationship journey and kind of what they were exploring, what they were looking for in their lives. Oftentimes, people will ask me questions about chiropractic. I mean, and not in this sort of a formal format, but just in passing, they'll say, like, I heard you're a chiropractor. We do a lot of work in the business development world, but people will take advantage and say, I heard you're a chiropractor. And I think the first thing is we always ask, why do you ask? Right. So that would be the first thing. If somebody was like, so what is chiropractic? I would say, well, why do you ask? Because it could be that they themselves have something that they're going through, or they're thinking of a loved one or someone else. So it could be that they're skeptical. So they might say, listen, I'm skeptical. And I think that your explanation is going to vary depending on why someone is asking you the question. I mean, in general terms, I'm a big, if I turn my camera here, my set of green books over there, I collect original green books, a big reader of chiropractic philosophy. And so, we could either have a very classical definition of philosophy, art, and science. But I really just think in real simple terms, the idea that the body is a self-healing organism, that the brain controls every single cell through and over the nervous system. When there's interference between the brain and any of the tissue cells, or the interference between the brain and its ability to communicate with the rest of the body, this causes some sort of alteration in physiology, which then subsequently is going to result in a loss of function or dis-ease. How that manifests itself shows up different in every human being. And then also potentially how that's corrected is different in every human being. But in its essence, that's what chiropractic is.
Okay, and what got you into chiropractic? Why did you decide you wanted to become a chiropractor?
Well, my cousin was a chiropractor back in the 1980s. His name was Stephen Hernandez. He's since passed away from pancreatic cancer. And he practiced in Mequon, Wisconsin, just outside of Green Bay, Green Bay, Milwaukee area. And I was very impressed. During the 1980s in the United States was kind of the heyday, the Mercedes 80s. And he was doing very well for himself, right? He financially did super well. And so one, as a junior high school kid, I was very impressed with that. And then two, I began to understand more about chiropractic. And then of course I had, my chiropractic experience. I was playing football, soccer, and I had gone up. It was playing indoors, and I had jumped up for a ball, and the goalkeeper went to punch the ball, missed the ball, and he actually hit me in the head. And when he punched me in the head, it flipped me upside down, and I kind of landed on the back of my neck, and I was knocked out. So I was out cold. And when I came to, of course, if you've ever been knocked out, like you don't even realize what happened. And I wanted to keep playing. And fortunately for me, everybody, they kept me on the bench. But then the next day, and this is very interesting in my story, but the next day I had excruciating back pain, like low back pain in my legs. And I had hurt my neck. I was punched sort of in the temple area and fell on my neck. And my mother then took me to a chiropractor, and with a couple of adjustments, like instantaneously better. And I just knew then, like, I kind of wanted to be a chiropractor because of my cousin, but I didn't understand it. And then once I had an experience with it, then I decided to pursue my education in chiropractic.
Okay, and why did you choose then upper cervical over full spine?
Well, I went to Logan College of Chiropractic, which obviously focuses on the sacrum and balancing out the sacrum and then getting the rest of the spine balanced from there. And at the time that I was at Logan College, now subsequently Logan University, upper cervical was really sort of taboo. You weren't, people didn't want you to do upper cervical. And of course, I was 21 years old. I was actually 20 when I matriculated. And, if you're a 20-year-old, a young 20-year-old, and they tell you you can't do something, well, you want to do it more. And likewise with philosophy, that's my fascination with philosophy. It was kind of like, oh, we don't worry about that. We don't need chiropractic philosophy, which drove me deeper into, wanting to read, wanting to understand, which eventually led me to Dynamic Essentials. Actually, real quickly, in my first trimester, I went to my first DE and heard Dr. Sid Williams speaking, and obviously was super impacted by him. But it was also at DE where I first heard Dr. Michael Kale speak. And he was there and he was talking about upper cervical. And it was almost like, in today's world where maybe somebody would be talking about CBD or marijuana, and you're like, wait, but in informal, so it wasn't like a clandestine, just some buddies. A guy was doing a talk on upper cervical, which for me, that was like this hidden thing. Like you weren't supposed to talk about upper cervical. So I was fascinated by it. And then Dr. Kale was checking people later on that evening. And so I went up to his hotel room because I wanted to see what was going on. And I was like, this is incredible. So I started to make the journey down to Spartanburg 6 times a year to study the Kale work. And then, of course, the deeper, I just feel like too, and this is my personal opinion, I'm not saying this is a fact, but I feel like the deeper you go into chiropractic philosophy, the closer you will get to the practice of upper cervical. And it's just a measure of the depth at which you're wanting to go. I kind of feel that it's somewhat difficult to actually journey deep into the chiropractic philosophy with BJ Palmer. If you're going to just, pick and choose, but if you're going to actually follow the timeline, well, upper cervical tells the story of his journey, right? Of what he was looking for. And I hold BJ Palmer in super high revere. I just honestly don't think that there has been another chiropractor as successful as that man. And I mean both clinically, financially, impact on humanity wise. I think that would be a great role model. And of course, we have a lot of great leaders today, but I haven't seen anybody really make that kind of an impact. And so, also I would say as a human, not as a human being, like trying to emulate him as a human, because of course he had a lot of flaws, but as a chiropractor on the humanistic side, I do strive to emulate BJ. I have a fascination with business and reaching a lot of people. I love media. I love leveraging media to try and disseminate a message, relationships, etc. And so that's sort of my journey, is sort of following in the footsteps of BJ. And everybody always says like, hey, well, what if BJ was alive today? Well, I don't know. Like, let's first understand where he was. Because if you don't understand where he was, then you can't speculate where he might have gone or what might have happened. If you don't know, it's, Sid Williams' book, Looking Back to See Ahead. But you really need to understand the trajectory of that man in his life and the development of chiropractic before you can begin to try and speculate on what lies ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always hard. A lot of people kind of look at BJ and go, oh, he's this guy who wrote these books. And first of all, you forget how many books he's written, plus the radio show, plus I think he was TV as well, plus working even on radiography and now what we all use as x-rays, even in the medical field as well. So he made a huge impact. How did that then lead you to Costa Rica?
Oh, well, remember, so I was 21, I was 24, just turned 24 when I had graduated. And as every 24-year-old in the world knows, I knew everything. Like, I mean, you know everything in the world. So I was like, graduated in 1995. It was an interesting time in the United States. We were looking at concepts of like national healthcare reform, somewhat of a socialized approach. The advent of managed care, HMOs, PPOs, the insurance was changing at that time. So there's a lot of uncertainty about how chiropractic was going to fit in. I was 24. I knew everything that that was to be known in the world. And so I was like, I'm going to go to Costa Rica, the most beautiful place on earth. I did not take National Boards Part 3 in the United States. I did not take National Boards Part 4 because why would I? You don't need that. I was never coming back. And I also did not speak Spanish. Why would I? And I moved to Costa Rica. And I honestly would say it's just a 24-year-old move. It's what a 24-year-old with no family does, right? You just do it. And I'm very thankful.
I understand.
I'm laughing because it's funny, but I'm very thankful. I have nothing bad to say about my experience. It was phenomenal. But looking back, I'm almost 50. It's like, what were you doing? But it worked out. It worked out really good for me.
Okay. And what I know, of course, for a lot of people who work in upper cervical, it's partly because of the logic and the philosophy, but part of it is the cases that we would see. What kind of drew you more towards those chronic cases rather than, back pain and shoulder pain that a lot of chiropractors deal with?
Well, I mean, I think that almost all chiropractors, that I know, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in my circles, that's why we got into healthcare first, and then particularly in chiropractic in healthcare, was to make a difference. And low back pain is bad. I'm sure if you had it, you'd be like, you don't understand, Shawn. But people don't die. I've never heard anybody die of sciatica. Like, what happened to Joe? Oh, he died of sciatica. And I'm not minimizing it if you have it, but I think that if we look at our origins and why we wanted to be a chiropractor, was because we wanted to make massive difference. I always tell people, look, if you can actually remember why you got into the profession, and that is, I'm saying if the reason is because you wanted to make an impact, because you wanted to make a difference, you wanted to help really sick people, then you also need to be accepting that you need to necessarily be able to look at your patient history, and you need to have people that have passed away under your care, not of old age, but of whatever it was that they were seeking your care for. I mean, because again, people don't die of low back pain. If all you're helping are people with shoulder pain and low back pain, I would say, how much of a difference are you really making? And so, I just want to make a big difference in the world. And it wouldn't matter what I was doing. And it's just, and again, there's a space for everything, but if I'm going to be in it, then I want to make the biggest impact possible. And so when I found out, first of all, because I didn't know chiropractic did all this when I signed up for it. I thought chiropractic was, again, the spine and it helped me with this low back pain, but I would never imagine that it had the power to do what it can do. But when I found out what it could do, I was like, why would I want to do anything less? And so here's what I noticed. And so I don't know how many of these interviews that you guys do, or the context of the discussions that happen, but I want you to take note of something. Every single time that I would hear a chiropractic speaker talk about a miracle, right? And they speakers have their stories and they tell of this miracle that happened. Well, notice that every time that there was a miracle, that they always adjusted the upper cervical spine. Like nobody's like, hey, I want to tell you this great miracle where I did a lumbar roll and miracles happen. If they're telling like this miracle story, it was the upper cervical spine. I then thought as a student, like, well, that's all I want to see. I just want miracles. Like, well, I'm going to skip the frozen shoulders. And again, there's a time and place for that. But I was like, for me, I want just the miracles. And that's really what drove me into upper cervical. Now, I do also want to say something. And if you have ever had the chance to hear me speak, and you and I spent a week together doing this work, I can tell you something with absolute certainty. In fact, we saw tons of people together and hung out, had meals together. You will never hear me talking about miracle cases. I will never tell a story of, let me tell you the story of this person, and they came in and then we did upper cervical and bang, miracle. You know why? Because now, so that was why I got into it. But now at 50 years old, not 50, I'm almost born in 1971. So I was at 49. I turned 49. So I'm 48. I don't even know how old I am. I'm 48 years old. But at 48 years old, having been in practice now for 24 years, almost for, as many years in chiropractic as not in chiropractic, I expect that. That's normal. When you tell me like a person came in and had asthma and I adjusted their atlas and bang, their breathing went right back to normal, I think in my head, well, what did you think was going to happen? Like, why are you so shocked? I had this patient that had this and that, and then bang, all of a sudden, like they had this miraculous recovery. Like, well, what did you think was going to happen? That to me is like me, coming on your interview and saying, Shawn, unbelievable. Here in the United States, I don't know what's going on over there in Asia, but here in the United States, the sun actually came up in the morning. You'd be like, what? That happens everywhere, and it happens all the time. It's nothing new. And so for me, seeing these things being witnessed to what chiropractic can do now for me is just normal. And maybe it's jaded to some extent, but I expect to see changes and improvement in almost everything physically in a person once their nervous system goes back to normal function. And so initially it was, I wanted to see that. Now I've seen it so much that it's just normal to me.
So in terms of, say, those cases, or even, say, the big move you took before, what would be some of the biggest challenges you've had? Because I'd imagine, especially if you're working somewhere like, say, Costa Rica, it's hard to then have other colleagues or even mentors, especially as a fresh graduate. How did you kind of overcome that?
Well, look, upper cervical chiropractors for the most part, and I don't run in very many upper cervical chiropractic circles because I understand it though too, because upper cervical chiropractors live on an island. Like it literally is like, that question, like if you were going to be on a deserted island, what one thing would you have? Well, and that's that thought, like, well, I would be all by myself with this one thing. Honestly, in healthcare and in chiropractic, a lot of upper cervical chiropractors think and feel that way. Like they're all by themselves. I can imagine, being in Asia, if you practice upper cervical, it's not like all your friends practice upper cervical. They're probably not chiropractors. And if they are chiropractors, they practice a different way. Well, it was the same for me. I was in Costa Rica. I wasn't surrounded by upper cervical chiropractors. And so what that causes, upper cervical chiropractors have to be very careful because it causes them to become super jaded. And they're always on the defensive. Even I'm an upper cervical chiropractor and I'm talking to someone else and they're automatic on the defensive, right? Like, and I get it because I'm sympathetic to it. I get why they're that way because they feel like they're on an island, but it also, I think, is damaging to themselves and to the promotion of upper cervical when they have that attitude. So what do you need to do is you need to find people that you can relate to. Now, for me, I was so blessed. My best friend in chiropractic, he's also passed on. Dr. Andy Roberts, came and worked for me 1 year into my practice. So literally, those of you who know Andy, and people hold Andy in very, very high regard. Well, one, imagine that was yours. So imagine you could hire that guy as your associate, number one. Number two, we lived together. We lived in the same spot. Like, we were together all the time, and we talked chiropractic and philosophy, and we read and we challenged each other. And so it was absolutely critical. And I would say the other part of that is green books. You know, the green books are so underestimated and undervalued as far as their strength in building your understanding. And from your understanding comes your conviction on what you know to be true. Because upper cervical, yeah, they talk about these like, oh, man, the guy had Parkinson's and then he didn't. And I get it. Sometimes it doesn't really fit in your head. And so first you need to have the context. You need to have the educational understanding of how that's possible. And then you can witness. And then when you witness, it just becomes that much stronger. And again, you got to be careful, because then you start feeling like, oh, I'm seeing something that they don't get it. No, it's not that they don't get it. It's just that they haven't read, they don't have the context, and they haven't been witnessed. And so they just haven't gone through the same steps. And if we were more open to sharing that, I think that the vision and the perception of the world relative, one, to chiropractic, and two, to upper cervical, would be radically different.
As well as, of course, the content of the green books, who would you say would you kind of associate as some of your mentors?
Well, growing up in chiropractic, the DE crowd. So that for me was Sid Williams, Fred Barge, Jimmy Gregg, Sotilli, Hoffman, Michael Kale, all of those people who were regulars, Sigafus, Reggie Gold. We had cassette tapes back then, right? And listening to all of these. That's another thing that's so lost, and it's sad, because we live in this information world, which means that there's so much information. We're broadcasting this interview. I'm in Indiana, you're in Singapore, and people all over, wherever they are, can watch it. But here's the drawback, is they could watch this or 9 million other things, right? Whereas in the 80s and the 90s, you didn't have 9 million options. So you got this cassette tape, and it was Sigafu's Red Deer, and you were like, oh my, and you just played. Like today, even if I gave you the digital recordings that I listen to, people aren't going to listen to them over and over and over, because you listen to it once, and then there's all this other stuff that you are being attracted to. And so that's lost. And even if you think you're into chiropractic, you just have to understand, like old ancient dudes like me, like we listen to the same recording, Valley of the Blind. You listen to it over and over in your car until you had it memorized. And that was also so critical. That was the way, and I'm not saying like we were in, existentialist times, but that was the way that information was disseminated, right? On, cassette tapes and paper. You'd get the photocopies and read. Today it's YouTube or Google. And so a lot of that context has been lost there as well. And so, I think that if you were hardcore committed, we have to rethink the way that we learn, or the way that we're downloading this information for ourselves.
And so what kind of advice would you give those young docs then, who maybe do have kind of this almost too much information? It's almost like it's too much for them to take in. What would you advise that they should do then to try and navigate through that?
It's funny, but it's a very old school piece of advice. But we preach about this idea of utilizing discernment. That there's so many voices in the world. And look, to be honest, you need to find a mentor. You need to find a voice. And if you're going to do anything good in the world, that's really what it's going to come down to. Why? Because there's going to be moments of turmoil. What I always say is, I'm a fan of UFC fighting. And not that I've ever done it, and I've been to live UFC fights. And when you as a human being are going to go into an octagon with another human being and try and fight, one, that's pretty crazy. Two, imagine now that there's spectators, there's onlookers. thousands of them, and they're screaming. And in the midst of all of this noise, somehow, in order for you to basically save your life, right? You don't want to be badly injured. You need to figure out who to listen to. Well, there's 20,000 people screaming at you, but somehow they manage to utilize discernment and hear the voice of their coach, because from the outside, they have a different perspective, and they can guide them, and they can give them, tips and guidance and instruction, but they can't take instruction from everybody. That would actually be impossible. They're only receiving their instruction and guidance from one voice. My advice today would be to find a mentor and understand how to utilize discernment. You need very few. If you want to win, if you want the heavyweight belt in the UFC, you don't need 500 people and 500 classes. You need a few really good mentors who will guide you to your objective. That's what I would recommend, because there's so much noise. Take right now, even we're in the coronavirus. Like, how do you know what to believe, right? There's so much noise. So you're going to have to pick a voice and guidance and utilize discernment in order to make decisions positively.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. So I was talking recently with Dr. Grant, and we were talking about, choosing target markets, and not just even in terms of discernment of how we learn things, but also discernment in how we pick our patients to an extent. What kind of advice would you have for service providers at the moment, especially the ones who maybe can't practice due to this outbreak?
Well, as we said, I was in Costa Rica, and I had a very big practice. So I was seeing, on average, 225 patient visits a day. And I worked 5.5 days a week. So I was seeing a tremendous volume. And, again, I was young. I would not do that today. I'm too old for that. I would be tired to try and see that volume. And I get tired in the Philippines. But at that moment, I had this big passion and heart for chiropractic, and I believe this. I live this. Every man, woman, and child, right, checked and adjusted when necessary since birth. And, even today, I am the chairman of the board of the IFCO. That is our vision statement: every man, woman, and child. But what I realized is that I'm one person. So I'm not going to be able to check every man, woman, and child, the 7 billion plus people on the planet. It's probably more now. So what I realize is that if I'm going to be able to only touch a limited amount of people while I'm here on this earth, I would rather only touch the ones who I was meant to serve. And I realize I was put on this planet to serve certain people, not everybody, just certain people. And so I try to discriminate on purpose so that I am serving the ones who I was meant to serve and staying away from those who I was not meant to serve. So every chiropractor who might be watching, for a fact that there are people that when you're with them or you see their name on the appointment book, that you feel joy. You're like, yes, I can't believe I get to work with Shawn. This is so great. But you also know that there are people that you are trying to serve, that when you're with them, you just feel terrible. It's such a negative energy. When you see their name, you're like, oh my gosh. Well, that person, I want you to know, also feels that way about you. Like, they're just like, what choice do I have? I have to go see the chiropractor. My chiropractor is kind of an idiot, but I don't have any other choice. And the best thing that you could do for them is to find them another chiropractor that could serve them and that would serve them well, because it's a good fit. I hope not everybody, but a lot of people have been in bad relationships. You know what that feels like. And you don't know a bad relationship until you're out of it, until you're in a good relationship. And then you're like, what was I doing? Well, these are all actual relationships. They're not romantic relationships, but you're in relationship with all these people on the planet that you're trying to serve. And I think it's imperative that you're with the right ones. If there was one thing, in fact, the one thing that I would say that would be most beneficial that we've talked about today, it's that. Just serve the people that you were meant to serve. Practice will be fun. It will be like play. You will lose track of time. I mean, when we're in the Philippines, look, there's sometimes when conditions aren't right and time slows down. But when you're locked in, right, doesn't the day just go by? You're like, oh, we forgot to eat lunch. Like, it just, and then you're like, how many people did you see? And they're like, 386. And you're like, I feel like we just got here. when you can live your life in that state because you're with the right people, you've lost track of time and space, then practice becomes a joy. And then here's the other crazy thing. You're going to serve a ton of people and you're going to be very well compensated and you're going to be extremely happy. Like, it just, life becomes very easy. You enter into a state of flow. I think that there's a lot of people in chiropractic who are frustrated with their practice, and they're blaming chiropractic, but it's not chiropractic. It's you're serving the wrong people. And if you would get the right people, all of a sudden everything will shift and life becomes easy.
So as well as picking the right people, what other advice would you give for some service providers to come out stronger from this? Because as we talked about, this is a bit of a level playing field now. How could they then come out as being more of a leader in their own communities at this point?
Oh, we're talking specifically with coronavirus?
Yeah.
Like with where we are now with the situation? Well, I have a lot to say on that. I think that this situation, as we said, is the great equalizer, that everybody's reset. It doesn't matter what your business was in January. Everybody's reset now. Like, everybody's not doing business, not transacting business. Very few who are actually experiencing any sort of uptick in their revenue right now. Because of that, you also have to say and understand, like, because I'm talking from a business standpoint, but what about from the consumer standpoint? Consumer attitudes are radically changing because we've taken all of the consumers and locked them in their homes, basically boiled them down to their essentials. I'm super fortunate. I mean, the recording of this, I just got my haircut today, and I understand that might super irritate people, but my stylist comes to my house. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't expose anybody or do anything crazy. But most people are in a situation where they are having to reevaluate all of their commitments. So they're not seeing their hairstylist. They're not going out. They're not buying clothes. They're not getting their nails done. They're not doing, they're not at the gym. They're not doing any of the things that they normally do. And so they're actually being forced to reevaluate these commitments. And so on one side, that's worrisome to you, right? So you're like, oh my gosh, well, that's my clients. But this is also great news because, as you said, opportunities everywhere. Well, that means that also, look, people that were staunch, allopathically minded individuals are beginning to question. People are questioning everything. So, the bad news is, hey, your patients are questioning your vitalistic principles. But the allopathic principles are also being questioned. People are looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute. So there was all these cases. It was a pandemic, but in some countries they're emerging. They've got it, New Zealand, they've got it under control. Yet there's no drugs, there's no cure, there's no vaccine. And this is in the subconscious minds of the collective, of the people now. I mean, there's no better time for somebody to emerge. Now, when I say emerge, I don't mean like banging, pots and pans and saying innate intelligence or even writing this on Facebook. The opportunity to emerge will first show up as an opportunity to lead. And, our coach, Lacey and I coach with Jay Abraham, teaches this concept of preeminence. In fact, Jay's oftentimes over there in Asia, does a ton of work in Asia. If you ever have the opportunity to see him live, I would highly recommend it. But preeminence says that you become the community's most trusted advisor. Not that you become the chiropractor extraordinaire. You tell them about Upper Cervical. You just position yourself as the most trusted advisor. Well, how do you do that? Well, there is some interesting research that's just come out about consumeristic attitudes post-coronavirus. And basically, it's been distilled down to 3 core messages that the people are buying. Their money is only being directed into 3 core places. And that is, 1, helping others, which is great. And again, you can see this shift in the world view because people are concerned that, like, the whole concept of wearing masks or even the concept of the self-quarantine is a helping others. It's not a survival of the fittest. It's not a I'm scared. It's I don't want to. I even just said it, like, I didn't expose anybody, like helping others. The second thing is safety. So PPE, the mask, the gloves, etc. And the third area is in trust. Well, here's the best news that you're going to hear all night is that you as a chiropractor work in all 3 areas, right? So you can step out and begin to lead. Now, again, the fourth area was not chiropractic. It was helping others, which is benevolence. Like, what can you be doing to have a marketing message that shows not that chiropractic, but that you as a human being are helping others? Number two, that you're worried about their safety and that you're taking precautions to make sure that people are safe. And number three, that you can be trusted. Sometimes chiropractors, some small sections of chiropractic go off the rails, and we think that the best way is to portray ourselves as the raving lunatics and rage against the machine and vaccines and all of these things. Well, we've got to understand that we're going to have to position ourselves as the most trusted advisor, not the most lunatic advisor. And I'm not saying that the concepts are lunatic. It's okay if you disagree with vaccines. You just can't come off as a lunatic while you're disagreeing. You have to come off as a trusted advisor. There's a way that it looks, there's a way that it sounds. But if you could package this together, and notice I haven't said anything about chiropractic because that's the precursor. If you can package all of this together, then people will begin to look at you and say, well, what are you doing? Just like they'll say, like, what are you eating? What, all of these things, what exercises do you do, but what are you doing? And then you're able to say, well, let me tell you about chiropractic. And because they are prejudiced coming into the conversation against everything else that they thought to be true, there is a brand new opportunity for them to be receptive now of a new information, of a new philosophy, of a new ideology, and they will listen to it. They are listening to it. They're beginning to question. And so if you are coming from a trusted position and speaking a new way of thinking, which is also, by the way, the new way of selling. But if you're speaking a new way of thinking, then it will be well received. And real quick, because I said that, this is also the advent of a shift in the way people sell in business. You're going to watch this and observe this all over the place. Beginning with, the advent of selling was selling merchandise. Like even back in, olden times where you had like a booth and I was selling my the things that I had woven, and you had grains. And so we traded merchandise. That's how we sold. Even then through the Industrial Revolution here in the United States, and then the production of things, and then door-to-door salesmen and saleswomen selling things. Then it began to shift where we began to have the information age and we began to sell solutions. And then we had the emergence of consultative selling, where you would ask questions and then they would tell you, what was wrong with them. And then you had a solution for them that you would then pitch on them. Well, the next advent, the next thing is going to be selling a new way of thinking, or just say a way of thinking, selling a way of thinking. And look, Gen Zs, Generation Zs, they already have this ingrained in them. See, they don't like to be sold things. They like to be sold a way of thinking. And then once they adopt the way of thinking, the things that they buy becomes clear as a result of the way of thinking. Now, again, if you're seeing this trend, oh my gosh, this is a huge opportunity for all of us in chiropractic, but we have to acquire the skills. We have to learn how to sell a way of thinking, because here's what we're trying to do is we're trying to sell a service. We're trying to sell like a rage against the machine. We're not speaking intellectually into the mind and pitching a way of thinking. We're pitching like, adopt my philosophy. And really what we're saying is, if you had a certain way of thinking, if you could unpack this will be of massive value. If you had a way of thinking, then the philosophy would make sense. And if you adopted the philosophy, then the practice, the service, what I do would be natural. You would, of course, want to get checked. It would all line up. And what we're still selling is we're selling it in reverse, right? We're still trying to pitch the people on the idea of getting checked and or adjusted, and then the benefits, right? Because they've told you features and benefits. But what I'm suggesting is we're going to go back all the way to the other side, and we're going to sell the way of thinking and forget the features and benefits. That's going to be the end point once they've adopted the way of thinking. So once they think this way, they'll naturally lead over and end up adopting our practice, the way, the lifestyle. All of that will be a no-brainer. It would actually be a given. Whereas in today's world, where we sell the lifestyle, and then subsequent to that, we try to pitch the way of thinking, the ideology, and the philosophy.
So of course, for you, you've had a level of success, not just in practice, but also as a coach. For those service providers then that you were saying, try and create their own preeminence at the moment, what kind of habits or traits do you have that you think would be beneficial for them, or that you think that they could use to try and reach that level within their community and then make more of an impact going forward and change the way that people think?
Well, I think that the entire world is suffering a financial impact, everybody, to some degree or another. And that means that the capital, the financial capital is decreasing all over the place. But what will pull you out of this, what will help you is relational capital. So number one habit is forming good relationships. And, we just right before this did an interview with Jordan Harbinger, the Jordan Harbinger show. And he's an expert at relationships. And he talks about the concept of dig the well before you're thirsty, right? Too many people are now looking at this situation and they're like, oh my gosh, so what should I do? Which likewise, look, the best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So even if you don't have the relationships, then you should be making those relationships. I've oftentimes said, and it's funny, this is right here. People ask me, I've been asked before in interviews, like, well, if you had to start all over, what would you do? And my response is always the same: is, look, if I had to start all over, I need one thing. Please do not take this. If I have my cell phone, that's all I need. I don't need money. If I had my cell phone, I can come back. Because in my phone, I have my contacts. I have my relationships that I have cultivated and fostered. And likewise, not every relationship too is first level relationship. It's people that I know that I'm in relationship with, and then the people that they know, and whether or not there's a willingness for the people that I know to extend our relationship into the people that they know. Classic example of that is in the Philippines, right? And likewise for you, like the people that treat us very well in the Philippines are very high ranking officials. Why? Because of the people we know. They don't know us. They don't, if they ever saw us, they'd say, who are you? The two Shawns, right? But because of the people we know, they then treat us differently. And so if there was one thing that I would say is invest massive amounts of time into growing and cultivating your relationships with people, and not to see them for what they can give to you. I find that very common, and especially in the chiropractic profession, is people are always looking at relationships because they want, like, I want to be in relationship with Shawn because hopefully he can, but eliminate that and just think about the idea of always adding value, reaching out and establishing relationships with people when you don't need anything. Thinking about people that you've lost contact with, and during this quarantine time, re-bridging and re-engaging those relationships, because it's easier to do that now than trying to reach out to someone when you like randomly want something but haven't talked to them for 10 years and then it's awkward, right? And so I think the key is always maintaining your relationships. Now, if you are just starting this, one thing that I would recommend is to every single day, we could do this from here to when everybody goes back. In your case, you just said June 1st. So for 30 days, imagine for 30 days, every day, what a challenge. I'm issuing directly to you, Shawn. 30 days, every day you try to meet someone new, someone that you don't know. And it's going to be harder because we're going to have to do it virtually. So we're going to reach out to people on social media, email. Hey, can we jump on a Zoom call? They're like, okay, I don't have anything else to do. And then the goal is to find out how you can help them. That's it. Just how, and you tell them, I watched this video with Shawn Dill, and he said that I should meet every day someone new and just figure out how I can help them. So would you mind jumping on a Zoom call with me for 15, 20 minutes? And I don't know if I can help you, but let's just see if I can. And maybe they want to meet someone that maybe they need a piece of advice because you have knowledge. Maybe maybe they're watching this and they're like, how do you make a Zoom call go on a Facebook Live? And you're like, well, that's easy. Let's jump on a Zoom call. I'll share my screen. I'll show you. And just by giving them, you have no agenda. You're not trying to get anything. You will be amazed in 30 days what happens to you. Because those people, there's something called the Law of Reciprocity. They're going to leave, and without you asking them, they're going to be thinking on how they can help you. And the more they get to know you, the more they understand you, they'll begin to connect you. They'll begin. And I think that's what happens is, for some people, people look at them and they're like, oh, you're so lucky. Like, you catch all these breaks. And what I've noticed is that they're not lucky. And I think a cliche thing would be to say, well, they're not lucky, they work hard. But what I've noticed is that they're not lucky. They have amazing relationships. People just want to help them because they help other people. And so people along the way, they just are very giving to them because they notice that you just want to help people without an expectation of something in return. I've got to tell you something. If in 30 days you can build up your relational capital, this will provide a massive, massive impact and boost to your financial position in your business when you do go back to work. Because again, people want to help you. So they'll make referrals, or they'll help you to meet the right people so that you can grow your business. They'll help you to get great deals to keep your bottom line down. They'll look for new locations, all of these things, because they just want to help you.
Okay, so as well as building more relationships, what kind of other goals do you personally have, say, for either your own companies, or what are some goals you would like to see happen more within the chiropractic profession?
Well, you know, funny, I did an interview today where somebody asked me that, and it was funny. You have very good questions. The interview earlier had really crazy questions. One of the questions was, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal? I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they're like, something that people tell you is crazy. I said, well, first of all, if I'm telling somebody a goal and they think I'm crazy, then they shouldn't be around me, right? I've got the wrong circle of friends. But one of the things that on the business side is that, you know, I dream, Lacey and I, our passion is to take the franchise, the Specific Chiropractic Centers, to be a publicly traded company here in the United States. We're a good long ways off from that, but that's what every day we wake up and we're working towards. Chiropractically, I think that we are very, very, very well positioned. You know, like I said, I'm connected with the IFCO, sitting on their board, and I'm the chair of the board there. I'm also on the board at Sherman College of Chiropractic, and I believe that over time we're going to face a massive opportunity for growth in this profession, and I think it's been accelerated, in fact, by the coronavirus and the pandemic. The changes in attitudes. It just remains to be seen what we do. But again, I do believe that it's possible for chiropractic to be seen as a vital force or a vital part of healthcare. I don't think that it's ever going to take over medicine, nor would I ever really want it to, because I mean, break your arm, you hope that there's medical doctors. I don't know any chiropractors that know how to do that. But I do think that it will become far more commonplace around the world for people to search out chiropractors for a myriad of things. And here's the other thing that I think is super important. And I'm sure that over there in Asia, in all parts where anybody might be listening to us, there's always conflict, right, amongst chiropractors, between the vitalistic side and the more mechanistic side, straights, mixers, therapeutic, non-therapeutic. And none of that matters. You know what matters is what the people want. That's it. Because if all of a sudden tomorrow, everybody in the United States, everyone in the United States just woke up and they're like, I got to get checked for nervous system interference. I'd better figure this out. If that was in their minds, even the mechanistic, musculoskeletal, back pain chiropractors would start checking people because people would be coming in and saying, can you check me? And so it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what the people think, what the consciousness is demanding. And so I think that, you know, my vision, what I would love to see is that the human consciousness creates an awareness of the importance of the nervous system and an awareness that the body's a self-healing organism. And I think if we just had that, forget chiropractic for a second, if they just had that as a way of thinking, chiropractic would become obvious as a choice. And so I'm very hopeful for that in my lifetime, and I see opportunity all around. I will not say that this is the best time ever to be a chiropractor, because everybody says that, and that's absolutely not true. You mean in the middle of the coronavirus when you can't practice for the next 30 days is the best time to be a chiropractor? No. Maybe June 1st is the best time ever to be a chiropractor, but right now, probably not. But I do think it's coming. I do think I've always said, I've been saying a return to glory is coming for chiropractic, because all things are cyclical as well.
I think, to be honest, a lot of the people then who say something like that, they, now's the best time, they always say that. Whether it's Christmas Day or whether it's coronavirus, it's always the best time.
Well, today's not the best time to be a chiropractor. I got to tell you.
So
also, as a student, listen, if you're a student and you're about to graduate, like, this week, that's a terrible time to be graduating as a chiropractor. You can't even go into practice. Like, the world is shut down. So yes, it is not true that every time is the best time to be a chiropractor.
So within this vision that you have, of course, not just for your companies, but for chiropractic, what kind of changes would you want to see happen then in healthcare systems, whether it's in the States or even in other countries as well? What do you think would be beneficial?
Well, again, it's just a way of thinking, and there's all this stuff. One thing that's great about the information age is that new ways of thinking are able to be shared very rapidly. And, there's information on YouTube and social media, even though social media is beginning to restrict that, the internet's beginning to restrict that. But the mere fact, and people get so upset, but the mere fact that certain information is being censored, that it's being restricted, is an indication that that information is reaching a critical mass. Because if it was 4 or 5 people talking about it, it wouldn't be an issue to censor. It just, people, they'd be like, it's random 4 people think this. And so that's natural. I think that sometimes too, we see the resistance, and rather than embracing it, we get mad at it. I have a business that's an EHR, an electronic health records software company, and we are just on the rise. Like, things just taking off. Well, of course, naturally, some of our competitors are antagonistic towards us. And I always tell our team, like, hey, like, if they weren't antagonistic towards us, that would mean we were doing something wrong. In fact, let's expect it. Let's revel in that, because that's just a byproduct. And so censorship, resistance, discrimination, resistance on legal laws, all of that, that's a byproduct of you actually making an impact. Now, I'm not saying, like, again, I'm not asking anybody to play the victim or be the martyr, but I just am asking that you realize that that comes with the territory, right? And so I think that the tide is shifting, and it's shifting in the people. A new way of thinking is emerging. And here's the only danger that I foresee on the horizon is, as the population adopts a new way of thinking, will the medical establishment go with them and adopt it, which would be dangerous to chiropractic, which would eliminate chiropractic, or will they attempt to force, which that's what they're doing now, right? With mandated vaccines and things like that. They're going to force their way of thinking on the people, which would, again, I understand. So if you have children, or you're alive, you're 20 years old and you're a chiropractor, you're like, this is terrible. But this is actually the best thing, because as the people are being forced into a way of thinking that they are not trying to adopt, it creates that inborn resistance. The resistance is natural, and you don't have to do anything. This was the best news ever. You don't have to be the martyr. You don't have to be the one that goes to jail or falls on your sword. The resistance is building in the people. Now, as the resistance builds, the people are going to be looking for, again, so now full circle, are going to be looking for leadership. And leadership doesn't look like, a raving, people don't love to follow somebody that they think will get them in trouble. People are going to look for a leader who emerges that looks, acts, and sounds like a leader. And my hope is that that will be you. If anybody that's watching that is holding and championing this vitalistic chiropractic philosophy, that you will step out and emerge as a leader. But I got to tell you, if your thing is like, I'm going to, act like a raving lunatic and, make people feel uncomfortable and, admonish people for not adopting my way of thinking, it's not very likely that you will emerge as the leader. And I will tell you this too, very important too, when I talk about like vision, I got to tell you, the leaders that will make the biggest difference are not known right now. So, and I'm going to put myself in that category. It's not me. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm not trying to position myself to be the leader of anything. I'm too old for that. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm too old for that. I'm just saying that like historically, if you look at the track record, it's an unknown individual who right now is locking in their conviction and preparing themselves 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they're 38, 40 years old, right? See, at that point, I would be like 60. And that's not very likely, right? I'm not running for office. Like the real movement leaders are going to be of a younger generation. And so you're getting prepped up now. And historically, I want you to know all of the people that we remember historically, we remember them now. But I mean, right on the eve of them making their historical impact, they were unknowns. So they weren't, it's not like they were these known people. And then, all of a sudden, Martin Luther King was famous his whole life, or Malcolm X, or Mother Teresa. They weren't famous until they were known. And so this is the thing is I hope that somebody right now is watching this and that they're like, that's me. But I also want to make sure that you're not saying like, I need, and then, whoever your mentors are. And frankly, it's the people that get brought on programs like this. It's the people that are on this side of the screen. It's not them. It's only people who are on that side of the screen or on that side of the screen who are watching that have the potential to actually tip the scales. And I think that's also something that's very dangerous, is that oftentimes it's the viewer who's looking at the screen saying, yeah, I hope that one of the Shawns does something, when in reality, the fate of the world and the fate of the profession hangs in the balance, and it's actually more in your hands than ours. But you have to step out and do something.
So as well as that kind of advice, people who are watching to kind of take that initiative, what other advice would you give people who are currently, say, staying at home, say more on the patient side rather than maybe on the service professional side?
What advice would I give to patients who are staying at home?
Either patients or even people who maybe aren't service providers, maybe people who work in a normal job and they're working from home and now they're just stuck inside of their dining table working on their laptop.
Yeah, and so somebody asked me the other day, they said, so when businesses go back, some businesses here in the States, as we're beginning to open up, some businesses are choosing to stay closed, under the guise of the greater good. Like I'm going to stay closed. And somebody had asked me in a business context, like, what do you say to those businesses? I said, unfortunately, I say that you're screwed. Like, why you don't have much of a choice, again, because it's the public that dictates. I have a same answer here, which is sad. Like, this is not good, being locked up in your house. I know that you are very conscious of what you eat. You, Shawn, I've been around you and you're in great physical shape. Well, that's not normal, right? But that's not normal, right? The average Joe that, at least got to go outside and walk between their car and the store, or their car and their office. They're just at home. And because they're at home, they're probably eating worse, right? They're lacking social contact. And this is not good. I mean, I wish what I would say is you've got to think about what you're eating. You've got to get outside. You need to get some sunshine and some exercise, even if it's cold outside, wherever you are in the world. And you need to first and foremost know this is not a good situation. And I understand we're doing it under the guise of protecting you and for the greater good. So, and the idea of, the well-being of the many over the one, but at the same time, as an individual, you have to look out for your own well-being as well. And it goes even beyond the physical, because then we have the emotional, we have the economic side. Human beings, we need to figure this out. We need to, and we can't get it done by force, but we need to come together somehow and figure this out, because this is just not good. There's not much good about what we're doing now, other than trying to diminish or minimize the number of coronavirus cases, which I'm not even sure how bad that is. But regardless, that's a moot point. We're doing it. But now we just have to think about the long-term impact of what that's doing. And it's easy to think about it like in grand scale. I would even just say, just think about yourself, like save yourself, like make sure that you're eating properly, go get some exercise to the extent that you are allowed. I mean, we were talking off camera, like, all of the restrictions, but figure something out and start with, this is not good. And when this is all over, Again, I think that I think this is advantageous for the chiropractors, because when this is all over, I think that you understand that this is not good. I don't think anybody's like, what are you talking about, Shawn? This is the best ever. Like, and even as you just said, like, everybody's probably gained a couple of pounds over this time. Your endurance is probably, you probably feel a little less energetic and flexible over this time. I think very few have leveraged this time to, you know, put themselves into incredible physical shape. I mean, it's not what people are doing, but that is going to create an awareness that you are probably going to need to modify and change your attitudes and behaviors towards your own physical well-being on the other side of this. I always say this, and so I think this applies to everybody, chiropractors, people, everybody. Where you are right now is a direct reflection of the choices that you made to get here. Well, if you understand that, then that is the key. That's what I'm saying, is that the world right now is understanding that where you are right now, locked in your house, is a direct reflection of the series of choices that collectively we as humankind have made that have ended us up here, afraid of this virus, locked in our homes, no longer having social contact, not allowed to embrace, like, even wondering, people are wondering if you'll ever be able to shake hands again. Like, can you imagine that? And I think that anybody that contemplates that knows this is not good. And so I just think that, you know, the biggest piece of advice I would give, and, you know, apart from like healthcare, is think, contemplate, reflect, question everything. And I'm not saying that I have an agenda. I think if you question it and you build it right back the way that it was, great. But if you don't ever question it, you'll never have the opportunity to grow.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's a perfect opportunity to grow. I was talking about this yesterday with a friend of mine who's not a chiropractor, and we were both talking about the idea of, say, whether it's trying to improve your health, whether it's trying to make more money, that you have to do these things, because otherwise, how do you then help other people if that's your overall goal, whether you're a chiropractor or anybody else? Even if you're a family, how do you help your kids if you're unhealthy? How are you supposed to inspire them to do more things?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, that's the same thing is as a humankind. This is a critical time, and a lot of it's easy, because of the nature of the problems. The difficulty is to go into fight or flight, to be sympathetic in our response, to be in a state of survival. But one of the things too is, in this moment, it is actually impossible for you to survive on your own. Like, if every small business in your town collapsed and you somehow made it, you would still collapse, because those are the people that you serve. Like, so they wouldn't have money to come and pay for your services. So you also have a moral responsibility right now to not just think about yourself, because I can't figure out a way that this plays out and you make it, but everybody else doesn't. And so this is a time too. And that's why when we said people are putting money towards helping others, because there is an increasing awareness. And so, but it starts with you, right? Like you said, you have to be healthy. You have to be emotionally sound. You have to be in strong relationships in order to be able to help. And you also have to have an awareness that you have to help, because you can't win this game by yourself.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of this story. I think it was from the Blitz in World War II in England, where, of course, everyone was helping each other. You have to support each other. You have to make sure everybody else is, because they're being bombed every day. Because the consequence was, if you were in a town or a city where, say, everyone got bombed and your business and your building was still intact, you actually then have to go outside and start destroying parts of your business so that it looked like it had already been bombed. Otherwise, you were a clear target. You were just going to be leveled and taken away.
Right.
So before we end today, getting a little bit more personal, what advice would you give yourself if you could talk to yourself, say, 5 years ago?
5 years ago?
You can pick a time. If you want it to be 10 or 2 months.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because I've had, like, so I think that I've had ups and downs, and you know, right now we're extremely blessed, and I think that oftentimes people might look at Lacey and I and say, like, man, you guys are super lucky, you're super blessed, but it hasn't always been great. You know, we've had financial difficulty, we've had relationship difficulty, and we've worked to put it together. So now it's great. It's awesome. So I would say to any point in my life when it was one of the lows is to understand. And I try and carry that, forward, because not every day is perfect. Tomorrow might be terrible. But suffering and pain is always temporary. It applies now. And I got to tell you, and this is such a weird thing to me. But I was telling our coach, Jay, Lacey and I were on the phone with Jay just a couple of days ago. And I was like, it's really weird because actually, and you've observed this, but actually over the past, 8 weeks, our business is way up. Our business is up in Black Diamond Club. New members are coming on. Our programming is super well received. And so again, I just recognize we're super blessed. But even with this time in the pandemic, pain and suffering is always temporary, but so is opportunity. And opportunity arises, and oftentimes too, we miss out on that. And so I would just go back, if I were to tell myself, is I would remind myself of that it's wherever you are, it's temporary. It's going to get really good. And even if where you are is really good, that's temporary too. You're going to have still, it's impossible just to run your life like that. It has its ebbs and flows, its ups and downs. And I think the key is to be able to withstand the lows so that you can enjoy the highs. And if you as a viewer are in a low point, here's the good news, it's temporary. But likewise, if you as a viewer, you're in a high point, you're like, this has been great. I've taken time off. I haven't been so stressed, and the ozone's repairing, and this is great. But that's also temporary too. And the key to everything is being able to withstand those extremes and finding yourself sort of riding that happy middle.
Well, thank you so much today for joining me, Shawn. Thank you everyone who's been watching this, whether it's live or on the replay. I'd also advise for anybody, especially if you are a service provider, to really look into Black Diamond Club. Personally, I've been a member for about 2 years, and I think it's invaluable how much it's helped to then mold my business, and even helped when I talk to other people, whether it's other chiropractors, students, or even people who are outside of our profession as well. If you have any questions, of course, you can always leave them in the comments, or you can always give me a WhatsApp on 8438-9550, email help@vitalitychiropracticcenters.com, and I'll make sure I get back to you. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, Shawn.
Thank you so much. You guys rock. Wish nothing but the best for you guys over there. Blessings, and thank you guys for all that you're doing.